This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. Today we're chatting with Jon Alexander. Jon co-founded the New Citizen Project, a participation strategy and innovation consultancy focused on supporting organisations in their work and impact. He's the author of the book Citizens. In today's episode, we're celebrating collaboration. Jon will share how his journey began in advertising but led to where he is today. We'll discuss the barriers that people need to overcome to collaborate and share. And Jon will share what he believes are the critical shifts we need to make to address the existential climate and food challenges we all face. Let's jump in. Jon, welcome to the show.
Very good to be here. Nice to see you, Paul.
It's awesome, always. I want to dive straight in. You were in high-end advertising for a number of years. You won awards, and to the external eye, very successful. Yet you quit this successful advertising role and co-founded an organization called the New Citizen Project. And you wrote a book to get an idea out in the world that as humans, we are citizens, not consumers. Tell us about the journey and what made such a bold leap.
I mean, the journey really started when I went into the advertising industry, and my first boss described my job to me by saying, what you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day. And he said, your job is to cut through that. You have to make yours the best. This was back in 2003, by the way, just to date it. And for a while, I was happy in the make mine the best, like compete, do the best. And then I started over time to ask more and more questions about, like, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers 3,000 odd times a day? Like, what is that story of who we are actually carrying? And I came to a point of saying, well, actually, we're telling ourselves a story like implicitly and in this kind of background way all of the time that says that we are independent, isolated individuals, that our agency is limited to choosing between a fixed set of options that someone else offers, and that pretty much tells us that those around us are selfish and lazy, and if we try and contribute too much, we're just being idiots. And that story is the kind of background noise of our lives. And so you can imagine working in the advertising industry while thinking those thoughts was pretty fun. So I kind of stumbled out of that and over time got to this question of this more positive question of what would it look like to bring the same energy and drive and creativity that currently goes into flogging stuff to people as consumers into inviting people into their agency as citizens, into speaking to people as creative, collaborative, caring creatures who can and want to get involved in shaping the world for the better. And that's what the New Citizen Project is. The book is really about a way of seeing this moment in time through those stories and saying, like, I believe we're in a moment where actually the idea of people as consumers has been a really structural idea of the last 80 years or so since the two world wars. And I think it's falling apart now. I think we built societies out of the logic that self-interest would add up to collective interest, that this was the right way to be. This was a good thing to do. Greed is good, right? And you can't solve the challenges of our time from within that story. You can't solve crisis of loneliness and mental ill health from within a story that says we're independent, isolated individuals. You can't solve crises of inequality from within a story that says that society is a competition. And most fundamentally, and bring us to food, like, you can't solve an ecological crisis from within a story that says we're separate from nature and that happiness is the accrual of material possessions. You can't solve climate and biodiversity from within the story of people as consumers. You have to shift the story. You have to go deeper.
So the book is called Citizens. Tell us a little bit more, so how do you break that down in the book?
The literal derivation of the word citizen, the original kind of etymology of that word is it literally means together people. So the fundamental idea at the heart of the book and my work is agency is like all true agency is collective. People, to really change something, people have to come together to do it. And also really important to say, like, to be a citizen isn't about what passport you hold or what legal status you have. It's about an orientation. My friend Baratino Thurston in the States has a wonderful podcast called How to Citizen, where he uses the word citizen as a verb. And I think that's really what this is about. It's like, what is it to engage in the world, connect with others, find collective agency and shape things together? That's really what this is about.
And how have people reacted to the book?
It's been bonkers. The weirdest moment was when I got an email in my inbox. I'd set these alerts, and I got this email in my inbox going, The Citizens is one of McKinsey's top 5 recommended reads for summer 2022. Yeah. And the other 4, hilariously, mate, were Bill Gates, Francis Fukuyama, Adam Grant, and Henry Kissinger.
Congratulations.
Yeah, there you go. More seriously, like the real response has been like how people are working with the ideas in the book. So I was saying to you before, I've weirdly heard that the Singaporean government has set up a thing called the Government Partnerships Office in order to work more collaboratively with its citizens to take on major societal challenges. There's a group who originally started up in the French Alps and now is spread around the world, who are putting reuse, recycle, upcycle at the heart of their business models and have created, trying to replace Black Friday with what they're calling Citizen Friday, with the call to action, share, repair and get out there. There's a gang who are doing citizen science projects in major African cities using low-cost air quality sensors and group running events to map the air quality of Lagos, Accra and Cape Town initially. And
I think I've heard about that.
Yeah, Urban Better.
With a professor from
Cambridge, Tallulah Ronnie. She's awesome. But critically, it's this thing of like, how do you... The challenge and the question I'm inviting people to hold, whether that's governments or small businesses or big businesses or chefs, is like, what would you do if you saw people as citizens, not just consumers? If you see their most fundamental need as being to create and participate and get involved and make a useful contribution, not just have stuff done for them. One of the most profound moments for me in the research for the book was I went a little way into the QAnon conspiracy theory. But one of the things, what you find is the gateway into QAnon is, we need you. Like, here's your first task. You have a role here. And people who have been spoken to as if their only agency, as if their only motivation can possibly be self-interest, as if their only agency is what they buy, is that's all they want to do. Actually, people want to be useful. They want to contribute. They want to be meaningful. And if those on the side of the angels don't offer agency and participation, then the people who actually want to screw the world up for their own gain are going to pretend to offer that instead.
When you share a little bit about citizens wanting to collaborate and create, share together, what barriers are you feeling we need to overcome? Like, what are the big things before people start adopting this mentality?
We used to have this thing in the NCP, New Citizen Project gang, where we sometimes say, like, why is consumerism made so creative and energetic and participation is so freaking boring, right? And the biggest barrier actually is that no one puts creative energy into designing for participation. We have this lovely tool that I think I would love to see chefs and food businesses leaning into, called the 7 modes of everyday participation, which goes, people can tell stories, people can gather data like the Urban Better gang and gathering air quality data, they can share connections, they can contribute ideas, they can learn skills, they can give time, they can crowdfund, like these 7 different ways that can all be like super creative. Like, take Beans as Hell, amazing campaign. You know how much I love this campaign. And I'm like, what if Beans as Hell was about like crowdsourcing the recipes from people's like heritage and different cultures and putting together out of people's ideas, not just putting beans on the menu for people to eat as consumers, but treating people as participants in the whole Beans as Hell campaign? Could we unleash like a citizen movement, not just shift consumer choices? That's the sort of shift I'm talking about.
I love it. So what would you see, in addition to that kind of shift, the biggest things that are going to need to open up for this to happen? Like, where's the pushback coming?
I mean, I think the really big scale stuff where this, like, actually at the level of whole systems, is that I don't think our democratic systems and structures are up to the task. I would say what we live in today is a consumer democracies where people's only agency is to vote and make it effectively a consumer choice between political parties or candidates every now and then. And I think what we're going to need to really shift systems is participatory democracy. We're going to need citizens' assemblies. We're going to need to actually like weigh up some serious choices, and there's going to be hard decisions to make and sacrifices. And those will only be politically viable if people are involved more directly in the making of those choices. And to get there, there's a really difficult set of barriers, because it's very difficult to even imagine a very different political system. We have to say to people, like, democracy isn't just about elections. Democracy needs to be about tapping into the ideas and energy and resources of a whole population, to be about holding big conversations. It's just a super hard job. We don't know how to do that. And even if we did, the really difficult thing is you've got to get politicians who have worked really hard to get to positions of power in an existing system. And you're effectively saying to them, you need to hold power differently. You've got to involve people when they've sort of been conditioned to see themselves as rising to positions of power in order to fix it for people. So there's a really difficult set of challenges there. I mean, I think something like the National Food Strategy project in the UK that Henry Dumbleby and co worked on, I think is really interesting sort of steps in that direction, where they did a load of distributed conversations. And now there's a really lovely project called the National Food Conversation that Sue Pritchard and the team at Food, Farming and Countryside Commission in the UK, again, are running, that demonstrate that people do want to be involved in these conversations, but really shifting that power is not easy. But there's so much we can do. Any chef in any food business and anyone involved in the food system can do, really just like from where we are, in shifting the mindset from thinking of people as consumers of food to thinking of people as participants in a food system, and inviting people into like joyful creative agency in response to that system.
Is there any parts of the world where you think are kind of out ahead and that we should be kind of like really looking to take this forward?
I mean, there's loads and loads of places where you could talk about the food culture being slightly more citizen than consumer. Like you immediately you think of Italy and that kind of thing. But in a way, I'm more interested in the sort of the examples from different spots where that you might not expect, where something really interesting happens. So one of my favorite stories is the £1 Million Mayor campaign. This goes a fair way back, but one day he was diagnosed as obese, a guy called Mick Cornett. The story goes that while he was at the doctor's, he picked up a magazine and read that Oklahoma was the third fattest city in America. And so his response was not to say, I'm going to go on a diet. He said, let's go on a diet. And he set the challenge to the city of losing £1 million in weight together. And this sparked off like weight loss groups all over the city. People who'd wanted to lose weight for ages because they felt part of a collective endeavor suddenly were actually able to do it, right? And then because it was a sort of citywide thing that was like a matter of kind of local pride, restaurants and food businesses started to change their menus and like try and adapt them. At one point, apparently the CEO of Taco Bell nationwide flew in and like negotiated changing the menus of Taco Bell with Cornett. And then it got to the point where they actually realized they'd done as much as they could do with the infrastructure they had, because Oklahoma, like many American cities, is designed for the car, right? So Cornett decided to set up a referendum to introduce a penny in the dollar sales tax, which would be hypothecated to investment in healthy infrastructure. And the referendum passed with a massive majority, and they've now built like water sports complex, they've widened a load of pavements, like all of this stuff. And when you think about how different that is to campaigning for like a sugar tax or whatever, which are the more conventional kind of responses to obesity, right? This mode of let's do this together, like how can we tap into our collective agency? How do we build it? That's the kind of example I'm talking about. So I could go to all sorts of places, but it's really about, I mean, I'm working on a project at the moment with Delia Smith in Norfolk, the county of Norfolk in England, just at a really local scale, going actually off the back of COVID, there were a load of mutual aid groups, as there are many places around the world, that sprung up in that time. In Norfolk, that's evolved to be a network of 27 food pantries, so not food banks, but like dignity-based food pantries, they call them social supermarkets. And now we're working with Delia and her kind of massive convening power and the football club and the Bishop of Thetford and all this to go, well, actually, like, how might we end hunger in Norfolk for good? Like, not ask government to do it for us, not just campaign for something, but just go, right, we have agency. If we could get all the business in Norfolk to sign up to these 10 things, if we could get all the schools to do these 5 things, like, we can do this. And there's this thing of like deciding to be up to something together and seeking to create ways for as many different people and organizations and backgrounds as possible to contribute that can unleash something really spectacular, I think.
In this work, what role does leadership play?
If anyone buys the book, in the hardback edition, I think it's page 20, there's a table with the heading Subject, Consumer, Citizen, and then like words beneath it. And one of the lines of this table, so it's like subject, consumer, citizen, dependent, independent, interdependent, to, for, with. It's like about like words that kind of prime you to think about different aspects. And one of the lines is about the role of leadership. And so in the subject era, in the subject logic, the role of leaders is to do stuff to people. Their role is to command, right? In the consumer logic, where people have stuff done for them, their role is to demand and choose. The role of leaders is to serve them. And I think that kind of concept of servant leadership is outdated now, actually. I think in the citizen era, the role of leadership, as I see it, is to facilitate, is to host and convene and hold space. And like sometimes that's about stepping in and sort of setting a goal. Like in a way, Mick Cornett, £1 Million Mayor, is a really good example of the role of leadership. Part of it is about setting a mission and going, let's do this together and occupying that space. Part of it's much more of it is actually about going, we can only do this together. One of my other favorite stories, and it's not directly food related, but is of how the Taiwanese government crowdsourced their nation's whole COVID response. And it began with the president of Taiwan making a speech where she said, we don't know how to get through this, like acknowledging uncertainty and danger, but then saying what we do know is that we'll get through it best if we get everyone involved. That, to me, that speech is a really powerful expression of what leadership is in a citizen logic. We don't know. I think it would be an incredibly powerful thing if a world leader were to say, the climate emergency is super real and we don't know how to get through it. But what we do know is that we'll get through it best if we get everyone involved. And it's so hard for anyone to display that kind of leadership because of the stories and the structures. Like, we still live in the consumer story. But we all know, right? At some level, we all know that we as a species are not on top of this thing. And the distrust and the suspicion that's arising, because we kind of know that we're being lied to, or at least not, if not outright lied to, we know that the whole truth of the challenge is not being acknowledged. And that is eroding at a really fundamental level the trust and the context. And we see the result. When people lose trust in politics and institutions lose trust in people in response, you end up in a vicious cycle, and then you create the space for a strongman leader to come in and say, I'll fix it, or at least I'll protect you. And even though we know that those promises are false, they're super appealing in times of deep uncertainty when we're being lied to or not told the whole truth by the other side anyway. And that, I think, is where we are. Like, we're living in this moment when the consumer logic simply can't provide solutions that are commensurate with the scale of the challenges of our time. The systems are therefore fraying and falling apart. And then until and unless we actually invite people into that, we hold that with some honesty, we're pushing people into the arms of the authoritarians, I'm afraid.
This thought and all these examples, they're amazing to learn from. When you look back at your work in advertising and where you started, what are the things that you've kind of taken forward and seen to use in kind of accelerating this versus the things maybe you've rejected from that space?
I think the obvious answers are, what I've rejected is the underlying set of assumptions about humanity. Advertising as an industry is fundamentally based and quite explicitly in an assumption that humans are narrowly self-interested individuals. And when I used to write creative briefs, the question you were asked was, who are you speaking to? What do they want? And how do you frame this product or service to meet what they want? in what they want for themselves. And we're kind of indoctrinating ourselves. I sometimes think actually of advertising as a kind of priesthood. It's like if the religion is consumerism, like the idea that we are consumers, advertising is the priesthood. And the core belief of that religion is that people are selfish. But it's not true, as we saw from COVID and mutual aid. And I could go on and on. The thing I have taken with me, though, is the belief in, well, the substantive thing is the belief in the power of ideas. Like, we need creative ideas, like the £1 Million Mayor. If he'd said, let's lose some weight, but when you set the challenge, let's lose £1 million in weight together. In Taiwan, they defined their COVID response. They named 3 design principles for their COVID response, and they roughly translate as fast, fun, and fair. And like so people, you need that creative twist. Beans as how? Like, it's being slightly superficial there as well. I've definitely taken alliteration with me. Fast, fun, and fair is one, but we also have this thing, we talk about the 3 principles of participatory organizations as being purpose, platform, and prototype. So purpose, what are you really trying to do in the world? So these are questions that anyone who wants to invite participation, whether as a business or as a government or whatever, can ask. Purpose is, what are you really trying to do in the world that's so big you actually need to involve people to do it? Doubling bean consumption. Like, how do we work with people to double global bean consumption? How do we tap into people's ideas, energy, and resources? Platform is then like, what are the structures and processes that you create that make it meaningful and joyful for people to be part of that? It's got to have some creativity to it. Like, my first crappy response to that question would be, is, as I say, like, what's the global Bible of bean recipes that are crowdsourced from different cultures and heritages and the people of the world, so they have ownership of that campaign. And then the third principle, prototype, is really just saying, like, you can't flip a utopian switch and transform everything overnight. So how do you find where the energy is and start to build with it? So in Taiwan, for example, in their COVID response, they started with some really simple, humble things. My favorite is they set up a phone line where anyone could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better, just because they wanted to make it so that everyone could be involved. And there's a little boy rang up apparently and said, the boys in my class don't want to wear their face masks because they're pink and they think that they're girly. So you should do something to make pink face masks cool. And I think you should work with the baseball team. And they found that idea, and they got 6 of the most famous baseball players in Taiwan, the president and the little boy, and got them on the national televised press conference in their pink face masks. So you'd set up something simple, start, and then, like, when people see the evidence that it's being listened to, that it's having an impact, then they want to get involved. And by the way, that Taiwan example, it sounds silly, but when you think about it, it makes loads of sense. Who knows better how little boys' brains work than another little boy? Like, tap into those ideas. And it worked. Like, I mean, it's not the only element of their response, but ultimately the Taiwanese response was arguably the world's most successful. They had the second lowest death rate anywhere in the world, and they never went into lockdown.
To wrap things up, one of the questions we always like to close is a bit of a tangent, but it's also about really bringing everyone in. What's one thing that you're really enjoying eating right now?
I've just been to India for the first time in my life, and I had the most incredible, I mean, how do you choose a single dish in India, right? Like, the dals that I had jumping out to me at the moment, because you have dal in the UK and you're like, cool, kind of salty, cheers. You get to India and you're like, what is this gold goodness? So yeah, I've become and now I've started looking for recipes to actually try and make a dal that is somehow commensurate with what that thing can be.
Having been to India, I can identify, and it's a learning process. But thank you, Jon, for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.